Welcome to this webinar on graded exams, which is delivered by the ISM Trust. I'm Richard Crozier, and before we begin, just a few technical points. You're lucky. You can't see me, but you should be able to see the PowerPoint presentation. You should also be able to hear me, but I can't hear you. So if you have any questions, please type them in the questions box, and I'll answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation. The webinar is being recorded and it will be available to view on the ISM's website, and you can find it at ism.org/webinars. So today I'm going to take a look at graded music exams. And they're really a significant part of life for many teachers, students, parents and adult learners. Music as a subject is quite unusual really, and having such a strong connection to exams as a key part of the teaching and learning process. The currency of graded exams is such that many young students will compare grades with their peers. Adults too are often heard to say, "I had violin lessons at school, but I gave up. I passed my grade 5 though." And parents sometimes put pressure on teachers to get their child through the next grade. I dare say there'll be some folk listening who would really identify with that. Where grades are used wisely by teachers and the teacher is trusted by the parents, exams can provide powerful motivation and help teachers and students to deal with some of the more challenging aspects of acquiring a secure technique, developing oral awareness, gaining technical fluency through scales and other technical work, and they also contribute to playing musical pieces musically. Just a word about my own experience there. As a beginner woodwind player, my first exam was grade 4, which may sound terribly precocious, but back in the middle of the last century, of course, there were no grades 1 and 2. My teacher clearly thought I could be squeezed through grade 4. And I'm pleased to say that I met his expectations and passed, I think with a merit if I remember rightly, so felt quite pleased with myself. But the main source of my satisfaction came not just from the fact I'd passed, but also the buzz that I got from any favourable comments from the examiner. There weren't many, I should add. And the most exciting bit for me was the stats, because when I received the certificate, there was a list of all the exam results for the UK in with the certificate. And I was very excited to think that I was one of only however many million people it was who had just passed grade 4. As we look at some of the issues surrounding exams, I should perhaps say that my thoughts and views today are entirely my own, and I don't represent the views or interests of any exam board. And throughout the webinar, I'm going to suggest some questions for teachers to think about and perhaps explore further at the end of the talk. You'll see them on screen as we go through the presentation and then again at the end. And the first one is this. I wonder if you use exams in your teaching, and is it perhaps because your teacher in turn also used them? Graded music exams date from the last quarter of the 19th century, Victorian England, when there was a huge growth in demand for external certification across lots of subject areas, not just music. In fact, as early as 1866, the Society of Arts and Tonic Solfaing movement introduced local examinations in theory and composition. And the popularity of local examinations, in other words, a nationally recognized qualification that you could achieve by sitting an exam in your own locality, helped to drive interest in music exams. These local examinations were also seen as a business opportunity, hence the number of exam boards that sprang up. Today, you can take a graded music exam in any of the usual instruments found in the Western classical tradition, and, following developments in more recent years, in traditional music, jazz, rock and pop, Indian music, to name but a few. So my plan for today is to start with a look at a little of the history behind graded exams, then explore the different boards and syllabuses available, how to build exams into teaching, and how to get the best results. So let's get started. Today there are a number of exam boards, but I'm going to concentrate mostly on the 4 perhaps best known: ABRSM, Trinity College London, the London College of Music, and Rock School Limited, which, as its name implies, concentrates on music from the rock and pop end of the spectrum. Some teachers will remember the Guildhall School of Music and Drama's graded exams, which were available until 2006, when they merged with Trinity to become Trinity Guildhall. I just should mention that Trinity Guildhall is such a wonderful name because it has the rhythm, da-da-da-dum-dum, Trinity Guildhall, and that's perhaps one of the reasons why it's still very much remembered today. One of the key features of the old Guildhall exams was that they used specialist examiners. In other words, your examiner had some accomplishment on the instrument he or she was examining. The new brand of TG continued until 2012, when it was phased out. And now the three largest boards all use generalist examiners. I should say that at this point that in focusing my attention on just a few exam boards, I don't wish to underestimate the value of other boards in any way, but I'm simply trying to make the task manageable in the time we have available. Trinity College London exams were launched in 1878. And within a few years, by 1885, they had around 5,000 candidates per annum at 220 UK centres, and it was bringing in for them £6,000 a year. That's something in the order of £500,000 in today's terms. By the outbreak of World War I, Trinity had around 30,000 candidates a year and had examined 500,000 since their exams launched. And it's reported that the majority of candidates were female. In 1882, the Society of Professional Musicians was founded, and within 2 years had decided to launch their own exam system. By 1888, the Society had some 500 members. And then in 1892, they changed their name and became the Incorporated Society of Musicians, whose offices I am now sitting in central London. So as you can see, there's a closer link than you may have known about between graded exams and the ISM. These graded exams were seen as formative assessments, with the diplomas which could follow them viewed as summative assessments. London College of Music was founded in 1887 and was an independent conservatoire until 1991, when it moved to become part of the Polytechnic of West London, which then became Thames Valley University, and was later renamed the University of West London in 2011. ABRSM dates from 1889, when, some 6 years after the founding of the Royal College of Music, and despite the rather difficult relations between the Royal College and the Royal Academy of Music, the two organisations decided that an alliance to offer exams would be both lucrative, had potential for success, and could impede Trinity's progress. Of course, there's lots more in the history, seeing how exams were linked to social reform and self-improvement, the spread of exams across the British Empire and so on. But if that brief introduction has whetted your appetite, let me just say that 2 books in particular are excellent sources of information for those interested in the history of graded exams, and they'll be on the book list at the end. Most teachers are probably familiar with the 3 largest boards whose focus is or has been on the Western classical tradition: ABRSM, Trinity, and London College of Music. And as a starting point, I would urge all teachers to make sure that you're fully familiar with everything these boards have to offer and to compare the differences between them. Perhaps we need a comparison site. I think that would actually be rather useful. Don't forget to explore the starter exams, the ones that come before grade 1, the jazz exams offered by ABRSM, and practical musicianship from the same board. If you teach groups of beginners, you may care to look at ABRSM's music medals or Trinity College's music tracks. Similarly, if your work comes under the rock and pop heading, Trinity have a syllabus for that too, not forgetting Rock School. London College's leisure play may be of particular interest to some students and adult learners in particular. So all of the exam boards have lots of different products. Do make sure you know what's available. When it comes to choosing which board, it does seem that not so many years ago, teachers who used exams tended to stick to their chosen exam board, often exhibiting quite fierce loyalty to that board. A combination of factors, including the way we're all encouraged to find the best mortgage deal, best credit card deal, best bank, best energy supplier, and so on, have reduced our levels of brand loyalty. And teachers, I think, are more likely to choose the board or syllabus they prefer, or, better still, will meet the needs of their students best. When it comes to exam pricing, there isn't too much to choose between the various boards. And here on this chart, I've just compared grades 1, 5 and 8 for a piano exam. And you can see that grade 1 piano comes in at around £40, grade 5 at around £60, and grade 8 at around £90. There is slight variation through the grades with each board, but broadly speaking, they're all quite similar. I wonder, are you loyal to one board, or do you use different boards for different students? Besides the most well-known exam boards, ABRSM, LCM, Rock School and TCL, there are of course many other boards offering graded music exams. And these include ICMA, the Independent Contemporary Music Awards, National College of Music and Arts, Nationwide Music Exams, Sangeet and Victoria College. So you can probably find something for whatever sort of student you're working with, whatever subject they're doing. You can see that a few of these boards date from late Victorian times, others are much more recent. And not so many years ago, the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland launched its traditional music graded exams. So something there for everyone. Most of these exams are Ofqual regulated, which means that the higher grades enable candidates to gain UCAS, that's Universities and Colleges Admission Services, points. For some students, this may be important for their university applications, so do check to see if your chosen exam board offers this benefit. Of course, there are other factors which affect your choice of exams. There may not be an exam centre in your neighbourhood. You may not like the pieces on a particular board's syllabus, or you may not like the syllabus requirements. And we'll take a look at those in a little more detail in just a moment. Something that doesn't get thought about too much, other than in terms of UCAS points, is where graded exams sit in terms of levels. So it's perhaps worth spending just a moment looking at this slide, as it is something that passes many teachers, students and parents by. Part of the difficulty with the system is that for the majority of students, levels equate with age. So the path through school with its key stages, GCSEs, A-levels, or L2 and L3 diplomas, followed by HND or A-levels, followed by a university, is a familiar structure. When it comes to graded exams, there will be many instances of children at primary school having achieved graded exam success at level 3, which, if nothing else, reminds us that this is quite an achievement for the individual to reach that level of attainment. Some will even have level 4 qualifications at quite a tender age. So if we look at that chart, we can see in our music area that we go right through, and I put in an example of an entry level 1, the ABRSM's Copper Music Medal, grades 1 to 8 at levels 1, 2 and 3, and then a whole raft of diplomas at levels 4, 5, 6 and 7. So for example, at level 7, in addition to the fellowship qualifications, we also have the new European String Teachers Association Postgraduate Certificate, and that launches in May of this year. And then a little bit further down the chart at level 4, we have the relatively new Certificate for Music Educators. So in addition to diplomas that have been around for a while, there are some new programs to aim for if you're engaged either as a teacher or a learner in this process. It's sometimes said that a particular board is inferior because certain of its graded exams don't include this or that. But we should remember that no exam includes everything. And no exam is a complete test of all of our knowledge, skills and understanding. Second, if we think of graded exams as formative assessments on a student's journey, The exams from any board will give an indication of progress, and that's exactly what they're designed to do. And third, I wonder if any of us ever came out of an exam, not just a music exam, feeling that we'd been lucky. I know I certainly have. That the questions matched what we'd revised, or that we'd been unlucky and hadn't expected that particular question to come up. The exam syllabus content doesn't dictate what we have to teach, and that's why it's essential for teachers to use exams wisely. And it's equally important that we don't expect anyone who comes along to us as a teacher and says, I've passed my grade such and such, to be absolutely fluent in all aspects of music at that level, because the graded exam isn't going to do that for us. As you can see from this very complicated chart, which might need a bit of quiet study after the webinar, all of these exams, and here we're looking at a grade 1 from the 4 larger boards, essentially have the same structure. In one sense, it seems obvious that these components represent the skills, knowledge and understanding that anyone learning instrumental or vocal music should have. But there is a but. They all require those components to be tested on the same day, and I'll come back to that later on in the webinar. With the exception of Rock School, all the boards offer a wide choice of pieces, although most teachers are likely to choose from a board's published collection. And in fact, I think I'm right in saying that London College make this a requirement. You can draw your own conclusions as to why exam boards publish collections of music. Most graded music exams have a similar structure which involves playing 2 or more contrasted pieces which are prepared in advance and can be played with or without the music. Candidates expect to be tested on the playing from memory of some scales and arpeggios. Maybe there's room for a change there. Some sight reading maybe, some oral tests, and in all taking between 10 and 30 minutes to complete, with the duration increasing as the higher grades are reached. Some include a viva voce, some facilitate the omission of oral tests at certain grades. There are numerous variations on the content. For example, London College of Music has one category of exam called Leisure Play, which is offered at 8 levels and involves the performance of 4 pieces, but without any additional components such as oral, sight reading, scales, and so on. The 3 largest boards, ABRSM, LCM and Trinity, all produce extensive syllabus lists. And in the case of piano, candidates are required to play 3 pieces, 1 from each of 3 lists. All 3 boards produce their own volumes of pieces, but it's only LCM which requires the inclusion of pieces from its own publication as a mandatory requirement. So we can see here that ABRSM is providing us with a choice of 18 pieces, LCM, many more pieces than that, Rock School prescribes the pieces, and Trinity also offers 18 pieces. A smattering of scales. Interesting to see that many contain C major. I wonder if we always want to start with that at grade 1, but no doubt that will give you something to question about later on. Some require various of the technical exercises to be completed. Some require a musical knowledge or viva voce. Trinity College invites candidates to choose from sight reading, oral tests, improvisation, musical knowledge, choosing 2 of those, and so on. So it really is important for us as teachers to make sure that we compare the offer from the different boards so that we can match the best offer for what our students are able to do. Of course, if we're following right through to diploma level, then there is an argument that says students will need to do everything. But we do know that some students aren't going to get anywhere near as far as that, so maybe we choose something that is a bit more fitting for them in the early stages. Well, Here's an outrageous thought. What about the idea of being able to use a piece from any board syllabus, even in an exam conducted by a different board? Or maybe somebody's starting up a new board that just actually does the examining bit and works from everybody else's syllabus. I'm quite sure the exam boards won't find that too popular a suggestion, but as consumers, we need to look to what suits us best. Of course, there's more to music than just playing it. And heavens, as teachers, we really know that, because instrumental and vocal teachers cover not only the business of enabling students to play or sing music, but usually include music reading, aspects of musical literacy, something about form and structure, harmony, performance skills, sight reading, ensemble playing, posture, care of the instrument, health of the player, hygiene, and so on. It's a wonder we managed to cram all this stuff into our lessons, and it's no surprise that in certain contexts some things get left out. In general terms, practical exams don't test posture, care of the instrument, and so on. Perhaps that's because we've all watched professional players and singers produce wonderful music, but with posture or technique that we wouldn't want to teach. In graded exams, it's the overall result that's examined. But maybe there's space for some rethinking there. And so I pose you the question, should exams include technique and posture and other topics? Would it be worth having perhaps a longer exam at certain levels, certain grades, to include some of these things? So far, we've focused on practical exams, but we mustn't forget the other form of graded music exam that's available, which is of course the theory exam. And in the case of ABRSM, it's a requirement of the board to pass grade 5 theory before entering for practical grades above grade 5. With Trinity and with London College of Music, I think I'm right in saying there is no prerequisite for taking a further practical exam. I know that some students and teachers feel unhappy about the imposition of having to pass a theory exam before continuing with their graded progress on their instrument. But there is a strong argument which says that you should have a deeper understanding of music, its form, structure, some knowledge of physics, harmony and counterpoint as you learn more advanced pieces. And I for one go along with that view. Whether there should be a prerequisite to taking practical exams and how you teach theory or incorporate it into your lessons is an entirely different matter. And there is a good case for giving this some time and thought if you haven't done so already. The three long-established boards, ABRSM, LCM and Trinity, along with Rock School, all offer 8 grades of theory. So I wonder, should we have more prerequisites built into the system? And should a practical exam be a prerequisite to a theory exam? I think it's really important when we're looking at exams to think around the whole subject rather than just accept any status quo that exists. So let's just think now for a moment about the purpose of taking an exam. I think the real purpose is to get an objective external view of a student's personal achievement set against national or international standards of attainment. A national currency is powerful, but an international one is significantly more so. The purpose isn't really to scrape a pass at a particular grade and hastily move on to the next grade, although I have a distinct fear that that's what happens in some cases. The real objective is to play or perform music musically. And there is, by the way, certainly for me, a potentially subtle difference between playing and performing, although we often use the words interchangeably. When I play a piece of music by myself at home, there is little or no pressure on me as a performer. The cat and the dog are both very tolerant, and they don't really complain too much even when I play wrong notes. If I go wrong, I can simply start again or whatever I will. But if I'm performing to an audience, be it one examiner or possibly hundreds and thousands of listeners, the pressure is there to give the best performance possible. And the factor of performance pressure must be included in the preparation for an exam, coupled with the reminder that the purpose of the exam is to measure progress using publicly available criteria. Each exam board develops a syllabus, and most refresh or renew their syllabuses on a regular basis, certainly for the most popular instruments, perhaps less frequently for the less commonly learned taught instruments. Exam boards go to a lot of trouble to choose pieces that they hope will appeal to teachers and students alike. They understand that as a teacher you may teach that piece a very large number of times. No matter how hard they try though, they don't always quite get it right. And that's when teachers quite properly start to moan about that particular board. We'll come on to complaining in a moment because it is a factor in the whole area of graded exams. No matter how good a syllabus is, or whether we as teachers like it or not, it's not a curriculum. And this is an important point because if we simply teach the syllabus requirements, we may just produce students who pass exams rather than develop a deeper understanding of music. As teachers, we need to know why we're entering candidates in order to know how to prepare and what outcome to expect. The whole business of assessing performance is potentially a tricky one, but the three largest boards publish their criteria which are clearly set out. It's perfectly possible to judge the components of any performance in terms of whether the phrasing, dynamics, intonation, and so on have been given due care and attention. But the question remains about how effective a way of judging a performance this is. It is, after all, an artificial situation and different to a live public performance. It does lead me to wonder if we should expect all beginners to be assessed this way. Instruments such as the piano, the violin and the flute, for example, have extensive repertoire, so finding pieces to include on the syllabus is, whilst difficult, much easier than for instruments such as the French horn or bassoon, where the repertoire is more limited. Finding suitable music is one thing, but ensuring that a particular piece meets all the requirements for a particular grade with a board is quite another. All of the boards have their own panels of examiners, and the usual rule, which I think they all apply, is that an examiner can only work for one board. Examiners are interviewed, and then if successful, trained before becoming part of a board's examiner panel. Once they start work on their own, their effectiveness and reliability is monitored, and there will be some form of regular training and/or standardization to help maintain consistency. I know the boards take this very seriously because of the fact that their work is regulated. But I do wonder if exam boards could share a little more with applicants, candidates, parents, teachers about the procedures they have for training and moderating examiners' work. I do feel there's maybe space for a little more transparency here. When we come to exam preparation, the key factor is whether the exam syllabus is the sole basis for teaching. All the boards provide a considerable amount of choice for teachers or candidates to choose from at any given grade. But I rather suspect that many teachers choose the same pieces, either because some alternatives are too expensive, or because, dare I suggest, it's easier to teach the same pieces rather than lots of different ones. If the starting point is the syllabus, it focuses the teacher and learner's minds because it clearly sets out what has to be taught and prepared in the weeks or months leading up to the exam. In one sense, there's nothing wrong with this very pragmatic approach. The risk occurs when the learner finds something more of a challenge than the teacher expected, so it takes longer than is really available to gain mastery. If the exam entry has already been made, the pressure begins to increase on both teacher and candidate. It emphasizes a reactive teaching approach, which is perhaps not the best strategy to adopt. An alternative approach is to build in preparation without even mentioning the exam to ensure that a good deal of material has already been covered before the idea of an exam entry is even suggested. The easy marks, if there is such a thing, the easy marks come from the supporting tests, especially those with right or wrong answers. A second source of marks is from attempting to do everything, For example, sight reading. And sometimes learners, when they're confronted with sight reading, do get very nervous. And I certainly know of stories from exams where individuals have frozen completely and have been unable to play anything. Well, don't forget to remind your students that if it's a keyboard, if they simply fall on the keys and make a sound, they've attempted the sight reading, they'll get some marks. And the same principle applies on the other instruments as well. Okay, it's not a very musical solution, but at least it might save a little face towards the end. I have my own experience there from going for an interview where I was asked to sight read something on the keyboard, my second instrument. I was extremely nervous, but it looked like I could more or less play it. So I did. And at the end, the interviewer said to me, well done, you read that quite fluently. I'm rather surprised you transposed it into E flat instead of playing it in E major. And I guess that's just something that nerves can do to you. So plenty of sight reading practice for our beginners. The third thing to getting the best marks out of an exam is making sure that oral awareness is a focus of all lessons. It's so sad when oral becomes an additional bit of stuff that we teach. And, oh, I'm sorry, I haven't got time to do the oral today. See if you can get your class teacher to do it with you. Oral is what we teach, is what music is, so it should be at the heart of matters from day one. And if we do it that way, then the graded exam requirements won't be such a shock when we get there. When it comes to building exams into teaching, let's go back to one of our beginners' first lessons. And I would suggest that most beginners simply want to make some sounds and play a tune, and they come along for a first lesson. I don't think too many beginners have in their minds the thought that they're desperate to develop a secure technique, gain a thorough understanding of chromatic harmony, a deeper knowledge of form and structure, and so on. I think most will settle for jingle bells and actually be quite happy with oats and beans, even if they're meat eaters. They're unlikely to want an exam experience unless it comes from sibling, peer or parent pressure. Even if they do arrive on day one asking when they can take an exam, it's our job as teachers to manage their and their parents' expectations in this respect. And where possible, to begin managing that even before we start teaching them. We need to enable the student to take the exam when they are ready and comfortable with it, rather than having it hanging over lessons, threatening both teacher and student. The key to success is the very simple combination of forward planning and always allowing more time than you think it might take. By planning ahead and working with your student, an effective path of preparation can be cultivated. Sometimes things do go wrong, and we need to think for a moment about complaints. It seems that in recent years there's been a rise in the number of requests for a remark of exams such as GCSE and A-level, and I wonder if graded exam boards have seen a similar pattern affecting them. Whilst I have every sympathy with a student who is actually given a lower mark than they deserve, there's also the issue of not being able to replicate an identical performance for a remark unless, of course, the exam is recorded. I believe that one board does record exams. I'm not sure if the others do. All that said, exam boards do like to know about genuine grievances, and it's strange to think that some of the teachers I've spoken to will not complain because they fear being adversely treated by the exam board on future occasions. I'm quite sure that exam boards would rather hear a complaint, and I'm equally sure they don't bear grudges against applicants or candidates. The essence of exams is human interaction, and any musical performance is shaped by the nuance of an individual's interpretation of the composer's wishes. That means that no matter how well defined the marking criteria are, and no matter how well the examiner is trained and has experience, there is scope for an element of human error just as there is in the performer's rendition of the music. I've heard some teachers say that they've listened outside the door of the exam room, which incidentally most boards don't permit. Being in the room is a different matter. Finally, on this difficult topic, the whole point of entering a student for an exam is that you accept the exam board's judgment as voiced through their examiner. If you don't feel able to do this, the answer is simple. Don't enter your students. I wonder what changes to exams you would like to see, and I'm sure you're going to fire in some thoughts to us, but I'm going to answer the question for you to start with. I would like to see boards keep the current form of exam. It's been around for a long time, and I think a wholesale change is unlikely to be a good thing. But, and there always is a but, I would like to see a form of exam in which students could accumulate success in the various components over a period of time. I feel strongly that for some students, maybe those with special needs, it's too much to ask them to produce everything on one day. I don't view this as a cop-out, but as an incentive to achieve the best results that you can over time. I'd like to see a greater variety of oral tests, different approaches through the oral tests. I'd like to see some, if not all, exam components available online. The idea of going to a centre, which may be logistically difficult for some people, and the idea of going into an exam room with one examiner is potentially quite difficult for a number of children and young people in our current school environment. Maybe we can change this. I'd like to see syllabuses really reflecting the needs of all learners in different contexts, and in some cases being more suited to their needs. Well, I wonder what your requests are in this direction. Well, I hope this stroll, a brief stroll around the topic of graded exams, has perhaps provoked some thinking about whether or not to enter a student for an exam, how to choose the most appropriate exam, and how to prepare the lead up to an exam. Teachers, students and parents have a choice. Exams, some exams, or no exams. Teachers, parents and students have a choice. Which exam board, which syllabus. Teachers, parents and students have a choice of when to take the exam. And let's not forget that exam boards depend on teachers to market their product. So let's make sure we voice our preferences loud and clear. We can influence the situation. To finish with, I mentioned a couple of books that I've really enjoyed reading, and if you, like me, you like a little bit of history, Cyril Ehrlich's book, The Music Profession in Britain Since the 18th Century, provides some fascinating insights, as does David Wright's book on the history of the Associated Board. Although it is focused on one board, it is a social and cultural history, and the view of late Victorian England is particularly relevant. Finally, the last couple of slides are simply all the questions put together so that you can have a think about them if you'd like to. I hope that's been useful in just taking an overall view of graded exams. So thank you very much for listening. Well, we've got some questions coming in here, and I'm just taking a look at those now to see if I can actually help with some answers. And don't forget that if you have got questions, you can type them in the box. Remember that you can hear me, but I can't hear you. But if you type them, I can see them. So let's just have a look here. We've got a question here asking about one specific exam board and asking whether that board's exams have changed much throughout the years. And it's one of those sort of crazy answers, I'm afraid, because in one sense, no, they haven't changed much, because the graded exam follows the same similar format that it's always done. But I think you'll find detail on requirements and choice of pieces has changed. So I would urge you, if you're thinking about coming back to exams after a while, you haven't taken any for a long time, do get hold of all the information. It's on their websites. You can write to them, email them, of course. I hope that helps a little bit. And someone else has asked about the difference between specialist and generalist examiners, and makes the case that in some instances generalist examiners can say something that is not quite technically appropriate about a performance or the way the music is played. And I'm sure that's quite true. However, I would stick to my own view that the generalist examiner is the right answer for me, because I think that the specialist examiner focuses very much on technical matters, and we could have a separate exam for technical matters if we deem it to be that important. But the examination is of the performance of the music, and if the music is performed in such a way that achieves a pass or better, then that's fine for me. I want to keep examination of the technical stuff separate. Here's a question that will resonate, I think, with many teachers. It's from Mrs. Trellis in North Wales. Well, I'm only joking, but I'm just saying that while I read the question. This particular individual says, a number of parents view me as an exam factory, and I find it very difficult to produce well-rounded musicians when I'm under pressure to achieve grades. Well, I think as teachers we have to stand firm on this, and if from day one we have conversations with the parents, I know that's easier in some contexts than others, we can set out our stall about the way in which we use exams, what they're for, and so on. And I really think it's important to steer parents off exams other than for particular reasons where they are, of course, quite appropriate. Another question here asking about the CME. That's the Certificate for Music Educators qualification that was launched at level 4 in 2014. It's offered by the two largest exam boards, and that's ABRSM and Trinity College London. So I would suggest that you go to their websites, or if you put it into a search engine, I think you'll find there are a number of centres offering CME around the UK. With a bit of luck, you'll be able to find one perhaps that's near to you. Somebody's tripped me up nicely here and asked me, well, what do I mean by having exam components available online? Well, I reckon it's possible to do some of the testing online. So, for example, I think using a Skype type system, I could play my scales and someone could listen to them and mark them. And I don't have a problem with that, certainly at a lower grade level. It may be that further up the grades we want to be more concerned about the finessing of this. But at a beginner level, I think that would be quite a nice way to actually offer some beginners the opportunity to take part of an exam. Someone else has written in. I have to say we have got a lot of questions here, so I think we'll probably be extending this webinar till about midday tomorrow at this rate. One colleague has written in to say that Trinity do record their exams, and that individual suggests that all exam boards should record. I must say I'm pretty keen on that. I do think it's a way of ensuring that examiners are on their mettle, and more significantly perhaps, it does mean that if there's a query about the exam result, it's possible for someone to listen to that exam and give a second opinion. Somebody's asked a nice question here about sight reading and asks, what is it supposed to be testing? And it's a very good question because it varies quite dramatically from keyboard, piano, and keyboard to other instruments. As a beginner woodwind player, I found myself sight reading on a daily basis. I was absolutely hopeless at it to begin with, but I quickly got better because I played in bands and orchestras. As a beginner pianist, it's a bit harder to get the fluency that you get from playing with other people. I do think it's an important skill, and I do think it should be taught, and I think one of the best ways of improving it on the piano is to play the music with either someone else or some form of backing. That way it forces you to keep going, and that's the way that I would tackle that issue. There's a question here which we need to send to the boards really about whether there should be a minimum standard for the pianos used at exam centres for piano exams. Well, I certainly think there should be a minimum standard. The other issue that often crops up is that if a beginner finds themselves playing on a grand piano, it really is a very different instrument to an upright piano. The whole situation in terms of one's visual and oral perspective of the instrument and the sound that comes from it is quite different. The music stands in a different place. The fact you can see over the top of it can be distracting if you're not used to that, and so on. And that's an issue. And maybe some exam centres should offer the alternative of an upright or a grand, so that beginners can use the upright if they wish to. Somebody else has written in to ask about online testing opportunities. There certainly are, some of the boards provide online app-based testing for practicing and learning skills. And of course you can use those, whichever exam board you choose to enter candidates for, you could still use the app to gain experience and develop oral skills. Just reading some more questions here. Somebody's written to ask about the publications and saying it would be so useful if some of the alternatives were in the same book. And that's always a difficult question because, of course, the exam boards have their publications to improve their income as well as make things more convenient for candidates and teachers. I think we're in a slightly sad situation today with the number of music shops that are closing down. Sorry, a separate issue, I know. And the fact that it's difficult to go and browse music these days as you could at one time. And that channels people more towards using the publications, which isn't necessarily beneficial. There's a question or comment here about vocal exams, whether it's possible for candidates to be able to sing the notes without having the technique to perform them skillfully artistically, which I think is, I think that's quite right, because when you're sight reading, sight singing, then you may not produce the sound as well and as beautifully as you would in any other context. There's another person here writing in about exam recording, and I'm getting the sense that we might be getting a bit of pressure on boards here. So yes, and I think a protest march is a good idea. I'm not quite sure whether the ISM is going to organise that for you, but I think if we feel strongly that exam boards should record, let's write and tell them. It's our prerogative to do that. reading some more questions here. Student who got to grade 8 as a child but couldn't afford the exam, so never took it. Should they go back to grade 5 and gradually bring them back through the grades? Well, I would certainly suggest going in at a slightly lower grade than grade 8, because grade 8 is pretty demanding. I don't think it's necessary to do all of the grades, but yes, going back to grade 5 might be a very good thing. It's a difficult judgment, but I think one you'd have to make when you see and hear the student perform. Someone here saying that they tend to tell parents that they don't wish to prepare students for exams until they're more than ready. And that's certainly a line that I would support 100%. I think it's ever so easy to get swept along by the desire to get an exam certificate, and that's not entirely what we're there for as teachers. Somebody's asked me a question about one of the slides in which I said access to orchestras, and that's a reason for taking exams. What I was meaning there is simply that in some contexts, it may be that you can only join the orchestra or the band when you've passed grade 5 or grade 7 or grade 8 or whatever it happens to be. It's a slightly dated way of doing things, and I hope there aren't too many instances of that still prevalent today. But if it does happen, then that's a reason for doing the exam. So just looking at some more of your questions here. Thank you so much for all these dozens of questions. We've got a question here about whether candidates should be permitted to take a pencil into the exam to notate sight reading. I don't know. I don't think there's a rule that says you can't do that. I don't know. If you're not sure, ask the board or take the exam yourself and scribble all over the sight reading and see what happens to you. A quick way to find out. Sorry, a slightly expensive way of finding out, but I'm sure it'll work. Another question here, that if a student's been entered for the exam and then near the time isn't quite ready, they should be allowed to pull out of the exam and carry it forward. I think there are possibilities for some boards with doing that, but I'm afraid the responsibility comes back to us as teachers here to make sure that we haven't even got the entry in until we're feeling fairly confident about the student's abilities. There's another request for recording just come in here. It just says they should be a bit like music medals, ABRSM's music medals, which are recorded and then submitted. And that's an interesting thought as well. Somebody's written here to suggest that it can be a problem preparing for exams because you spend a whole year playing the same pieces. And I would say, no, let's not spend the whole year playing the same pieces. Let's play lots of different pieces. The more fluent we become, the easier it will be to introduce a new piece. If the syllabus changes and we have to move up to another piece, okay, but the more fluent we are, the easier that will become. Another one asking if exam boards could receive recordings as an option for particularly nervous students. And I don't think that's a bad idea either. Again, it goes around all this issue of recording and online activity. And something maybe we need to put a little bit of pressure on the boards to consider. Somebody writing here to say they like the idea of being assessed for the different components at different stages. So I'm glad somebody liked that, because I remember with some discomfort preparing some candidates for graded exams, and just when you think they've cracked F major, you discover it's G major and they haven't got it right at all. And whilst I enjoy F major with F sharps in, not everybody does. So it is crucial that we have enough time to prepare all these components. Somebody's asked if different exam boards offer something similar for pre-grade students, and certainly ABRSM, Trinity and London College offer pre-grade 1 exams, the idea being getting to get familiar with the exam experience. I'm sorry, I'm not sure about Rock School on that. Forgive me, I don't have the answer in front of me. Somebody asking about, is there more material for sight reading for ABRSM and Trinity? Certainly both boards publish preparatory sight reading materials and sample sight reading materials. I think I'm right in saying from past exams. One teacher I know trawls second-hand shops and buys music in order to provide sight reading and in order to explore more music, because it's very cheap to buy, and it means that she has a huge box of music there for people to sight read. It may sound a bit crude, but I would certainly recommend that as well. Somebody asking if ABRSM will introduce music medals for piano. I don't know. Ask them, because if you say you'd like that and other people join you, that's how we get things to change. Somebody asking here if it's possible to practice on the piano before taking the exam. I think it's true that all exam boards will allow you to play for a few moments before the exam actually begins. Of course, time is limited, but encourage your students to be ready for that and to try it. It may be possible if it's a local centre and you actually know the people whose home it is or whose school it is, that you could go in days before. I realise logistically that's more of a challenge. Somebody asking here, drawing our attention to the fact that one board allows a piece composed by the candidate to be offered in exams. They point out this is open to abuse. How do we know that the piece is of sufficient difficulty, not too difficult or not too easy? Well, in simple terms, we don't know, but I still think it's good that that option is there. For me, it makes it a more musical activity. Somebody asking here that should we reduce singing tests in higher grades? I feel two things about this. First, that we shouldn't be so worried about making children sing. If we do it from day one, it's less of a problem. However, if it really, really is a problem, and we have done it from day one, then yes, why do we not offer an option? Heavens, when we play music with other people, we don't always sing it. We sometimes just play it to demonstrate what we mean. So I think we could offer that. Somebody asking a very specific question here, that should all examiners complete the general comments box? I get frustrated by the fact that it's empty. I think they should. The mark forms that I have from about 100 years ago when I took exams are very, very brief. Just like my school reports in those days, there would be occasions when for one piece it will just say good or a suitable standard, which isn't very encouraging. The more words you get from an examiner, the more beneficial it is to help the student keep going, to be motivated. So personally, I would like to see a little bit more. Somebody said, what about nervous candidates? Could they have an option to play prepared pieces twice and be judged on the better performance? Well, that's an interesting idea, and no reason why we shouldn't, but why not offer one performance online, and then that would make it a little bit easier, and compare the two. I just think that we are pushing exams into a straitjacket, or exams are pushed into a straitjacket by what the boards do because of historical factors, and maybe we need to change that. Anyway, I'm really sorry to say that we've come to the end of our time. Thank you so much for so many questions, which I'm looking forward to reading through. I can't answer more of them now, but we will certainly be looking at them. My colleagues here at the ISM, I know, will be reading through them. And if that provokes further action from the ISM's part, then watch this space. Meanwhile, enjoy your teaching and have a peaceful half term coming up. Goodbye.